So I am here to introduce Ariana Anaya, and her presentation today is going to be tips and tricks for Texas Assisters, and she's going to be covering just pretty much the marketplace application, sharing best practices along the way, and how best to communicate some of these complicated terms to consumers. And she's also going to hopefully help you understand the limitations of the marketplace application and workarounds that assisters can use to help people enroll in the right plan. And I know that many of you may be familiar with her. She used to be an assister here in Texas, and she's a dear friend of mine. I really miss having her around here. But I'm gonna go ahead and pass it over. If you want to read more about Ariana, you can do so again in the speaker bios at the Zoom events lobby. You can click on that and read more about her. But without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and pass it over to Ariana.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Let me go ahead and get my slides up. I must say it's really such an honor to be here today, in particular because Texas is so near and dear to my heart. I think we do such amazing and such incredibly hard work. I do presentations for a lot of states and in a lot of places, and every state has their challenges, but Texas kind of has every challenge I've ever encountered, and just the incredible work I've gotten to see. And hopefully this presentation will be helpful for everybody here today. I'll be sharing contact information and some additional resources at the very end, but please always feel free to shoot me an email, or of course, Lynn can be contacted as well for any questions or concerns regarding these slides. So I'm going to get right into it. This is tips and tricks for Texas assisters. It's specific to Texas, but of course there is a lot of information that can apply to other individuals in other states. All right. So here's the agenda, which I have cleverly outlined, although looking at it now, it doesn't look as pretty. There's going to be kind of 4 main sections to today. I'm going to talk about some updates for 2025. I'm going to go through some general tips and tricks as applied to the actual application itself, and then some tips and tricks connected to plan selection. And the hope with both of those sections is to kind of zero in on things that I have personally seen in my time as an assister as complicated, or things I've seen members of my team, or just places that can be challenging, especially because once in a while the application gets these updates that may completely change the look and the feel of it. The good news, of course, is that for the most part, eligibility stuff does not change, and it's simply a matter of ensuring that you have clarity as an assister when it comes to explaining these things to your different clients. Lastly, resources will link you to a couple of items that may be of use. One is a 2024 presentation on plan selection. This really goes into the nuts and bolts of it, just in depth, how to explain things to clients using kind of my own personal script. There's also a couple of different items that I would encourage you to check out, specifically if you're interested in building a network overview for yourself or your team. Some of the different ways of doing that are included there, as well as just links to some one-pagers that I created for Center on Budget that might have some relevance to you or members of your team. I'm sure everyone here is accustomed to hearing or using acronyms a little bit too excessively. So I wanted to share upfront some of those acronyms, but also some of the terms that may be used interchangeably by you, by me, by people within the community of enrollment assisters. So PTC stands for Premium Tax Credits. CSR stands for cost sharing reductions. And we're going to talk a little bit more about both of those, but those are the 2 forms of financial assistance the marketplace makes available for certain eligible individuals. Not going to deep dive into those, but we will kind of touch on eligibility. Assister is the term I tend to use to talk about people doing enrollment assistance. However, usually assisters are in Texas either what's called certified application counselors, the acronym for which is CAC, or navigators, or potentially agent or brokers. But any of those terms is kind of interchangeable with the term assister. What we call the client or the applicant or the patient that we're assisting can also vary. If you work out of a health center, you might be calling that individual a patient versus an applicant or consumer or client. So there's really no wrong way to refer. I mean, okay, that's not true. Of course, there is a wrong way, but all these terms can function interchangeable and may have more significance depending on the specific site in which you're offering assistance. So if I use any of those terms, that's who I'm referring to. And finally, I tend to say resource when I'm referring to something that could be of use as you go about your enrollment work this season. And again, the final slide in this slideshow will be a list of some resources that should be applicable to what we're talking about today. Okay, so this is going to be a relatively short session or a section just taking us into the 2025 updates. The challenge always of doing this presentation before open enrollment is all the information is about to change to some extent. And we can't necessarily see it until late October, because that's traditionally when plans will be released. However, we can at least get a jump on things like the FPL chart because they're based on last year's FPL levels. So this is kind of the updated FPL chart for next year. So we can see what 100% of the FPL level is for a household of one. And then we can see what 400% is for a household of one. So to read this chart, you're looking at the column on the left-hand side. And that's going to be where you look at the number of people in the tax household. And then you must kind of move from left to right through these different rows to see what that amount is. So in Texas, to be minimally eligible for financial assistance, usually a person needs an income of at least 100% FPL. So that's the furthest leftmost column in the yellow. I find this chart also helpful because it outlines the FPL brackets as concerns eligibility for cost sharing. So the cost sharing reductions cost sharing refers, of course, to the deductible, out-of-pocket max, and copays. And generally, where someone's income falls determines how much they're eligible for a reduction of those cost sharing amounts. So again, in that first yellow box, we can see between $15,060 and $22,590. That's that first bracket of cost sharing reductions. That's where an individual is eligible for the most robust level of reduction. The pink boxes give you the limits of that second level of cost sharing reductions. The green boxes give you the limits of that final box or those limitations of cost sharing reductions. And then if we move into the blue, individuals with income in that range are not going to be eligible for cost sharing reductions. If this chart is of usefulness to y'all, you can use it. You can take a screenshot. This is completely for you guys. As Sonia mentioned, I no longer live in Texas, so I made this in the hopes that it would be helpful for y'all. It's also specifically made because, of course, Texas did not expand Medicaid. So this chart would need to look a little different in a state that did. What I've done here is to illustrate how the cost sharing reductions may vary specific to each of these areas. So hopefully the yellow is coming across. We can see that in that very, very, very first category, a person would be eligible for a $0 deductible versus a $5,000 deductible in the blue category where they are not eligible for cost sharing reductions. And of course, I want to clarify that what we're looking at here is just one plan. It gives a sense of the distinctions between the different levels of cost sharing, but a non-standardized, non-easy pricing plan would of course have different values, but they would still show this level of reduction between them, if that makes any sense. The values you're looking at, the deductibles, out-of-pocket max, and copays, are in fact the standardized plan parameters for 2025. So we at least have that information when it comes to what next year plans will look like. This table, which I realize is a little bit hard to read, it's not the prettiest, is actually an overview of those parameters. So as hopefully everyone knows, there's a category of plan on healthcare.gov called easy pricing plans. They have a green price tag next to them. And those plans are all going to share the exact same cost sharing. So that means the deductible, the out-of-pocket max, and the copays are standardized for those easy pricing plans. This is a real boon to assisters because it means you have to explain fewer plans, theoretically, but it's also a real boon to clients. Another item I want to touch on is the affordability percentage for 2025, just so we're all on the same page about that. I'm sharing an image of the employer coverage tool just to recommend that as much as possible, assisters try and get clients to have their employer fill this out or provide the information ahead of time because it can be very hard to capture when you're on the spot with a client. In the right-hand corner, you can see that last year's affordability percentage was 8.39. For 2025, it's gone up a bit. It's 9.02. So if someone's employer offer of coverage meets what's called the minimum value standard and is under 9.02, that means they would not be eligible for financial assistance through the marketplace because they are eligible for an affordable and adequate offer. And again, best way to get this information from clients is to send them away with this sheet and get them to have it completed. Sometimes a good idea is when they're making an appointment, make sure they know this is a step that we'll need. I want to especially call attention to the back of that sheet because that's where the really relevant information is. So it's only actually half of the page, but this is what's going to be most important. And the employer, especially if HR fills this out, they should be entering this information accurately. We should be able to move forward with someone assuming that the information filled out here, if it is filled out by an employer whose information is on the first side of the sheet, we're supposed to be able to move forward as assisters assuming that this information is accurate. So to pivot back briefly to standardized plans, the whole idea here, of course, is to limit how many choices are increasingly becoming available through healthcare.gov. It's strange to talk about choice as a bad thing, but I think in this day and age, we can all agree that having too many options can kind of cause people to hesitate to make decisions. It can put us in this choice overwhelm situation. And there are some stats for 2022, which is the year before these rolled out, about the number of plans that were available on average, usually more than 100, and how many silver plans on average were available. And this puts tremendous pressure on assisters to potentially be explaining 100 plans, even when we narrow it down to silver plans. That's quite a lot to do within a short space of time. And more than anything, it's rather a difficult thing for an individual to process. There's only so much room in one's brain. You can't necessarily take in this much information at once. So that's what the idea here is, to limit how many plans a client has to think through. So for 2025, we are supposed to have a bit of an update. I say supposed to because stuff always changes. But it should be that issuers are only allowed to offer 2 non-standardized plan options per network type and metal level in 2025. So that would be very, very helpful. It means that essentially, if a carrier only offers one network type, such as PPO or POS or HMO, they can only offer two standardized plans in silver, along with a standardized plan, which will be the same as the other standardized plans offered by other issuers. So that could simplify things for everybody immensely. Again, I can't promise that this will actually happen, but this is what we have been told is the intended plan for 2025. Okay, so from there, we're going to move into the application. Lynn has sent out, I believe, a recording that takes you step by step through the entire application. It is very long and sometimes perhaps not the most interesting thing to sit through. But I think if you would like to kind of get that familiarity ahead of time, this is certainly something that's been made available. And some of these tips and tricks will pull from that. I tried to zero in on the ones that, in my experience, have caused the most confusion or tend to benefit people from hearing as much as possible. Okay, so the application is kind of newly within the past 3 years divided into 4 sections. The benefit of which is if you have to log out, at least you'll be starting at the beginning of a specific section rather than having to start all the way at the beginning, which is what used to happen. Now, we today are going to focus the bulk of our attention on section 2 because it's the longest and it has the most complicated parts. I think I do mention one thing from section 1, but when you do, or if you do, sit down to watch the walkthrough, be aware that section 2 is the longest, lengthiest, and has the most in terms of outside knowledge that you may need to pull from to answer these questions. But we're going to get into some of those items right now. So one thing I did want to flag, and this is from section 1. So as soon as I say we're going to focus on section 2, I take us into section 1. But one question that I think more and more of us are probably getting a little pushback from with clients is questions related to sex or gender identity. And this is because more and more individuals in this day and age are feeling safe enough to acknowledge that they are transgender. And so they may have questions about why it is they have to indicate their sex or gender identity on an application like this. And that's a very valid question, especially since the Affordable Care Act was responsible for ensuring that a cisgender female was no longer a pre-existing condition, if that makes sense, simply because women's healthcare costs have historically been higher than men's for a lot of reasons. So if you do have a client with questions or concerns connected to a transgender identity, there is always that little learn why we're asking, but I've pulled it up and you can see this isn't necessarily helpful when it comes to transgender issues. So I wanted to flag for y'all, just because I think this is an issue we're going to encounter more and more often, is the healthcare.gov section on transgender healthcare. I've worked over the years with a number of coalitions connected to this community, and this is actually, in many respects, decently accurate when it comes to how individuals who are transgender should approach applying for the marketplace and even looking for healthcare, which can be tricky, especially in a state like Texas, where there may be exclusions. So this can be a great resource to pull up if you're working with someone who expresses these concerns, either at this question or later on when you're dealing with plan selection. Some of the page is of course here, but the link itself is underneath that image. Okay, so to start, I'm going to call attention to a question that I think seems very straightforward: marital status. Are you single or are you married? Right? This seems easy. This is a little tricky because a lot can ride on it when it comes to eligibility for financial assistance through the marketplace. So first, I want to make sure we're on the same page about what it means to be married in Texas. So, first and foremost, it means you have legally gotten married and you are not divorced. Straightforward. Now, wherever you got married, if you got married there, you are considered married in the United States. Be aware of that because we have dealt with individuals who have a spouse in a foreign country and who have been told by a tax preparer to indicate themselves as single on their returns. That is not correct. If you are married, you are married. You're not magically single. There's no legal separation in Texas. This is important. People will sometimes come and say, well, I'm separated. That may not matter for our purposes because that's not a status that Texas acknowledges. So you essentially need to be married or divorced. Secondarily, a person can become married by quote unquote holding themselves out as married. And this would mean, first and foremost, if they have ever filed jointly with another person, their taxes, they are married. Secondly, if they hold themselves out in official capacities as married, if they refer to their significant other as husband, wife, or spouse, in many respects, especially coupled with filing taxes jointly, that means they are married. This is important because you will sometimes work with someone who's married, but perhaps for whatever reason, unable to file jointly with their spouse. And if that is the case, they may not be eligible for tax credits. In fact, I'm going to say that most of the time, if you are filing separately, you are not eligible for financial assistance through the marketplace, which is consistent with how taxes are written, where there are substantial benefits for being married filing jointly and not any for married filing separately. Okay. Now there is a workaround if the person is eligible to file as head of household, okay, which is a criteria you would need to ensure they are eligible for. Typically, they need to have a dependent, a child dependent, and typically there are other criteria they need to look into. But if they can be head of household instead of married filing separately, then you can indicate them as single on the marketplace application. This is something they would absolutely have to be a participant in. They would have to allege, yes, I do file as head of household, or I will be filed as head of household when 2025 tax time turns around. But if that's the case, they can file as single. The exception, okay, where they are still, when they file taxes, going to file as married filing separately, is if they have experienced domestic violence or spousal abandonment. In that case, you would again mark them as single, but when they file their taxes, they would file as married filing separately with an exception. All right. Not a bad thing to point out to someone because the tax preparer would need to know that. Okay. All right. We're going back to the application, except we're kind of immediately going back to talking about taxes. So there are two types of tax dependents that it's important to be aware of. Not everyone is eligible to be a tax dependent. And that comes down to two criteria, but two categories of dependents that we want to look at. So first and foremost, I think is the one most people are familiar with and expect, what's called qualifying child. Second one is called qualifying relative, but it might be better to think of it as qualifying person because the individual doesn't necessarily have to be related to the tax filer. There are circumstances in which someone can be a qualifying relative without being related. So we're going to go through qualifying child first. And if you are trying to determine whether or not someone is a qualifying child or a dependent at all, start with qualifying child. If they do not meet the criteria as qualifying child, this is when we go to qualifying relative, okay? So always start here and then consider qualifying relative if you're having any difficulty determining if someone is a dependent of someone else. So first and foremost, a qualifying child must literally be a child as laid out there: child, stepchild, adopted child, brother, sister, niece, nephew, or grandchild. So child. They need to be a US citizen or resident of the United States, Canada, or Mexico. They need to live with the tax filer for more than half the year, except for temporary absences, such as if they go away to college, that can work. There are certain age requirements. So one of these four must apply. They either must be age 19 at the end of 2025 or under 24 if a full-time student for at least 5 months in 2025, or they can be any age if they've been determined disabled. A qualifying child cannot provide more than half of their own support for that year. This is pretty unusual, but there have been situations with a low income family and a child who is working where their income actually makes them ineligible to be a qualifying child or even a qualifying dependent. It's unusual, but it happens. Okay, so if we have ruled out a dependent as being a qualifying child, we want to take a look at qualifying relative. So it's a relative, a step relative, an in-law, or, and this is the unrelated part, a full-time member of the tax filer's household in 2025. So meaning they physically live with them. So I, in theory, could have a boyfriend who lives with me, and I could claim them as my qualifying relative as long as these other 5 criteria apply. So first criteria is the reminder the person cannot be a qualifying child. So we want to have checked that first. There's no reason for us just doing the qualifying relative test until we've done the qualifying child test. Must be a US citizen or resident of the United States, Canada, or Mexico. Must receive more than 50% of his or her support from the tax filer. Must be either related to the tax filer or live in the tax filer's home for 2025. And then lastly, and this is an approximation because this data hasn't been released yet, the qualifying relative should earn less than around 5,300 taxable income in 2025. So if all these things work, this individual would be eligible to be claimed by the tax filer for this next year. Dependents can, of course, be from outside the country, as we've mentioned previously. They might have an ITIN, they might have a social security number, but again, this needs to be the United States, Mexico, or Canada, okay? So if they reside in those countries, they can appear as dependents as long as they have either an ITIN or a social security number. Okay, so we're pivoting back to the application. This is one of the latter questions in section 2. And I bring this up because I've seen it cause a lot of problems. I think this question in former years was optional, but now it isn't. And I think that might be the source of some of the difficulty. But it asks whether any of the people in the household can, any of these situations apply to them. So pregnancy, American Indian or Alaskan Native status, or incarcerated, detained, or in jail. So I've given some notes on all 3 of these statuses, essentially to outline why the application asks this and what the implications are. But the one I really want to highlight is the pregnancy one. Generally speaking, when it comes to Medicaid for pregnancy and CHIP, Medicaid and CHIP, not for pregnancy, you do not get to decide if you would prefer that coverage or marketplace coverage. You kind of have to go with what you're eligible for. That's generally how I remind people to think about eligibility for the Affordable Care Act. If the coverage predated Affordable Care Act coverage, generally speaking, if you're eligible for it, you're not going to be eligible for the marketplace plans. However, the exception when it comes to CHIP Medicaid is related to pregnancy. If you are working with a client who is intending to enroll in a marketplace plan, even if they are pregnant, you have the option to not indicate it here, which feels sticky because the question is no longer listed as optional. But we've clarified and re-clarified that. This is the one space where an individual can make that choice between CHIP and Medicaid when it's related to pregnancy. Be aware as well that CHIP perinatal is not comprehensive coverage. So for an individual who is eligible for CHIP perinatal and or the marketplace, CHIP perinatal will cover costs related to the pregnancy, but not costs unrelated to the pregnancy. So let's say in theory, if a pregnant mother sprained her wrist or something, chip perinatal would not be as useful. So helping a client understand that if they're expressing a concern about picking between the two can be helpful. Medicaid for pregnancy, however, is comprehensive, and that shouldn't be something a client needs to worry about. But again, if someone would rather get enrolled today in a marketplace plan and they are pregnant, they have the option not to indicate this here. Okay, we're going to move into tips and tricks, the plan selection portion.
Hey, Ari, can I ask a quick question?
Of course.
While you're on pregnancy, so when people previously had children, we gave them the advice not to update their marketplace application because the marketplace application would move them over to pregnancy Medicaid potentially.
That is such good advice. Yeah, I'm thinking mostly open enrollment, but that during the year, when somebody goes through the application, of course, everything clients hear, every notice they get from the marketplace is just call the marketplace, just call the marketplace. I've seen many a new mom go through, update her application as she's supposed to do, right? Because she has a new child, a new household member, and it either kicks her out of eligibility for her marketplace financial assistance because it pushes her income below 100% FPL, or because she was pregnant recently, it kicks her application to CHIP Medicaid to be deemed eligible or ineligible by the state and cuts off her marketplace coverage. For a new mom, especially because mothers get to keep their babies on their coverage for a number of days initially, this is not good. This is one of those things, if you are working with a pregnant woman, and great heads up from Lynn, give them that reminder. Hey, once you have your baby, let's wait at least a month to make any updates, at least, and then come back here. Because it's sometimes a much better idea to separately apply for baby through HHS and not go through the marketplace application and compromise mom's coverage. Okay. Stuff can always be updated later on, right? But when you update something frantically, there's often a higher probability of making a mistake with someone's all important coverage. So keep that in mind. And good note, Lynn, I breezed past that. Okay. So we're going to talk we're going to talk today about a little bit of plan selection. At the end of this, I do have a webinar linked that's longer and really deep dives into my script and how I have sort of categorically done my plan education, my plan selection education. Everybody should and will develop their own style, their own manner of doing it. But especially when I started, it was so useful to see and hear somebody else's script, somebody else's kind of rapport and how they did it. So my intention is not to suggest that the way I do it is the way to do it, because of course not. But I think it's very helpful as we develop our own styles and our own methodologies to hear each other, which can be embarrassing too. So please feel free, if you want, under this presentation to go through mine. But we were trying again to kind of highlight some of the elements today. So firstly, I wanted to apologize that I can't time travel into the future once 2025 plans have been released. What we're looking at is unfortunately 2024 plans, which is less useful to y'all right now. The good news is the longer this goes on, the more it seems plans are starting to be a little bit more consistent. Health insurance companies are tending towards certain repetitiveness when it comes to different styles or network types. So hopefully the changes will be not huge. But of course, deductibles go up every year, out-of-pocket maxes go up every year, and co-pays tend to go a little bit as well. But so right now we're looking at the screen that you would see right after you've completely updated an application and you've gone through the enrollment steps, and now you're actually looking at plans for 2024. We're in Houston right now. This is, I want to say, I'm pretty sure Harris County in Houston. try to remember the zip code I used, but I can't remember. So I wanted to call your attention to the fact that to the right hand of the screen, you get this little clever overview of the number of plans, the total, the bronze, the silver, the gold. I like to say this because this is the moment in time after the application when I want to prove to the client, I've been asking you questions. Now we're going to switch and I'm going to kind of be the expert and you're going to ask me questions. So I like to start this off by kind of showing that I know things. So you're eligible for 121 plans. I can say that right off the bat, right? Even when I'm showing the client the screen, because I know where that information is located. Then what I like to do, rather than scrolling, which, I do not want to scroll through 120 plans, and I promise you the client does not either, is to go into that filter immediately. I cannot express enough how this kind of bookends the session, how you can give them an overview that will give them confidence and that I think will really establish that you know what you're doing, that though this is a ton of stuff, you have the tools as an assister to show them exactly what they need. So when we get into that filter tool, it kind of looks, I think, not the greatest. It's so many things. It's like, is this a filter tool or is this information overload yet again? But I tend to highlight the plan categories so we can see, we know right off the bat, no expanded bronze plans in this market and no platinum plans. So we can say you're eligible for bronze, silver, gold plans, and I'm going to talk about those more in just a bit. Likewise, we can see that there are 3 plan types in this market. So right off the bat, if the client had come to me and said, oh, I want a PPO, PPO plans, I want a PPO plan, I can let them know, unfortunately, in this market, you're going to be eligible for EPOs, HMOs, and POSs, but they don't have a PPO in this market. And I want to say that's true across Texas, but I know it's going to turn out that there is a PPO somewhere that I haven't looked. As far as I understand, it's mostly, however, EPOs and HMOs in Texas, some point of service, but not many. I will talk more about those a bit later on. So I like to highlight that information. But then what I really like is to pull down the insurance company list. And I can, in case they've said things already, clients tend to come in giving us more information than we need at the application stage. I can say, so the health plans in your market are as follows, right? And start to get them familiar with the names. Maybe they told you initially, oh, I had Ambetter last year, I loved it. Or maybe they told you, I had Ambetter last year and I don't really want Ambetter this year. So this kind of lets us orient what we know with what they know and gives them, again, that oh so helpful overview before we have to get into the nitty gritty of 121 plans. So I pull this up just because I think it's such a nice amount of information, and we have it just as soon as we pull open the filter tool. You don't have to tell them 26 bronze, 51 silver, 44 gold. That may not be useful information, but it's wonderful to think that at the touch of a button, all of those 100 plus plans are sort of collated into this way in which we can actually organize them. We can indicate we want to look at silver plans offered by Community Health Choice, or we can indicate we want to look only at gold plans that are offering POSs. Of course, the computations here are endless. The permutations of what we can see are endless. We want to start on the right foot. We don't want to go down 49 different rabbit holes. So I'm going to pivot us now to El Paso, Texas. And again, we're looking at 2024. So El Paso has a 10 plans fewer, is that right? Still quite a lot. But it has 7 insurance companies in front of 8 instead of 8, right? But we do still have the POS listed here, which is interesting because it tells us that there's something in common between these networks, even though they're so far away, hundreds of miles far away. So we have the same information that we were looking at with Houston, but here in the left-hand side, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to click on silver, and then I'm going to click on easy pricing. So remember from earlier when I was telling y'all that we were looking at the stats for easy pricing silver plans and how that was impacted by cost sharing. And then I showed you kind of an ugly chart that listed out the standardization parameters for 2025. This is what easy pricing is all about. So of those 46 silver plans, 12 of them fall into this easy pricing category. And that's pretty good because it means that we already know exactly how those 12 plans out of the 46, how they're set up, how their cost sharing is set up. In other words, we have that information right now. Even though I don't know what plans are going to be available for 2025, I know what that cost sharing is going to be at this moment based on that chart. I don't have to have it memorized. That's what that chart is for. And I can pull it up easily. So what I would recommend doing, start with the least expensive silver easy pricing plan. Filter for it. The reason is because you can give a very complete plan education just by moving from left to right, explaining premium, deductible, and out-of-pocket max, and then head down to the copays section and tell them this information. Make sure when you explain deductible that you don't say, this is what you have to pay before the plan covers things. That is one of my biggest pet peeves ever, and I see that definition everywhere. The deductible is certain services. Ahead of certain services, you would pay full price until you've met it. But as we can see immediately with the copays, these services, most of them, do not have you meeting your deductible first. This is from day one. And that is a wonderful update that healthcare.gov has made, that it says from day one. So there's no ambiguity there, okay? Now, there is some ambiguity, as you can see under the deductible, where it says health and drug combined. Yes, that's kind of typical, or has been typical in terms of plan design, but we are sometimes seeing separate deductibles for quote unquote health and drug. So that would mean that prior to a person paying a copay for certain tiers of medications, they might have a smaller deductible to meet first, okay? A good thing to potentially check in the summary of benefits, but healthcare.gov is at least trying to do some of the work for us. It makes me a little nervous as an assister that it says deductible, health and drug combined, but then see how at the bottom left-hand side of that first screen, it says a $20 copay for generic drugs. I don't like that it doesn't say per or from day one. That makes me think I want to double check that in the summary of benefits. So be aware of that. This screen is very helpful, but it also can give us tips to double check on things if the client wants to look at that plan. Now, once you've explained that first least expensive easy pricing plan, guess what? You've explained every single easy pricing silver plan in that market. And that, to my mind, is rock and roll. So once you've explained that plan, you can say, this is the plan, this is the easy pricing plan offered through Blue Cross Blue Shield. Cigna has that plan, Ambetter has that plan, has that plan, has that plan. Those were company names. However, the networks are going to be different, and the cost per month, monthly premium, is going to be different, okay? So it gives us this nice base point. Plenty of people will pick the easy pricing plan, and why not? I mean, it's right there. It tends to be less expensive, okay? But if they, for whatever reason, don't like those metrics, then you have a natural bridge to start talking about companies. And then from companies, you can narrow down. And again, this might be only choosing between 3 plans in 2025, because you'd see that easy pricing version, which they've potentially rejected if that's what you started with, and then 2 non-standard plans. So this takes us theoretically from 121 options to 3 in relatively short time. So I said I was going to give you guys some further information on what plan types are, but I do want to say that these definitions are a little tricky because they're not hard and fast. We have thus far in Texas been able to rule out PPOs, and I actually want to say for a while we didn't have POSs either. But this year we do have a POS. The reason I'm showing you the PPO is because it connects to my mind a little bit to the EPO, just as the HMO kind of connects to the POS, in that both the HMO and the POS may require a PCP, meaning you have to select a primary care provider. It can sometimes be an office, it can sometimes be like a provider entity as opposed to an actual individual. But HMOs and POSs may require that, whereas an EPO and PPO does not. Likewise, an HMO and POS may require a referral to get from PCP to specialist, but they don't have to, whereas an EPO and a PPO definitely do not. Biggest distinction, however, when it comes to HMO, EPO versus POS and PPO is this out-of-network situation. HMOs and EPOs do not allow for out-of-network routine care. They will not cover it. Now, I'm not talking about life-threatening emergency care. There are laws to protect individuals in that situation. But a POS and a PPO is kind of known for the fact that you can go out of network. Now, what I really want to clarify is that this is a benefit connected to network. It is not a benefit connected to affordability. So it's important our clients understand that distinction in Texas. So I'm pulling up a current POS. I believe I went back to Houston for this, but I want to say that this plan is also available in El Paso. So this POS plan is kind of unique in that it offers that ability. It offers someone the ability to go out of network. And for the right type of client, that might be very important. That might be very useful. I'm pulling open the summary of benefits. I would get to that, just so you all know, by hitting that view plan details and then going into plan documents. But one wonderful thing about the Affordable Care Act is that it's standardized to some extent how summary of benefits are laid out. So generally, the first page will have this answers to important questions, and these important questions are standardized. Page 2 will generally also have information that's standardized, which I'll show you in a second. So if we take a look, and I find this interesting, we can see a couple of things in the right-hand corner. We can see the coverage period, meaning for what year it is. As I've already told you, I have to show y'all 2024 plans because 2025 has not been released. But there's something else I want to call attention to because I'm seeing this all over the country when it comes to Blue Cross Blue Shield POSs and PPOs. It says HMO. And that is kind of alarming if you're looking at this plan specifically because it's a POS or because you thought it was a POS. The good news is I'm discovering that just whoever did these updates for Blue Cross Blue Shield, and I saw the exact same thing in 3 other states. So we're going to flag it for them and hope they don't have this issue for 2025. But I can tell that this is not an HMO. And here's how. So listed right away is the deductible, and it lists the network deductible for the individual and for family. And I've tried to kind of pull that information into my own little chart here. It also lists lower on the page, the in-network out-of-pocket max, first for the individual and then for the family. So this means it's not an HMO, because the one thing we know about an HMO is it does not allow this. So we can, to some extent, write this off as an error when it comes to the summary of benefits versus the plan itself. Now, what I really want to call attention to is the out-of-network information. So if we're looking at this page at the deductible for out-of-network, it's $15,000. So what that means is you have an out-of-network deductible of $15,000 for an individual. Your out-of-network max is unlimited. This is still allowed, right? We used to have a circumstance prior to the passage of the ACA where companies could actually limit somebody's potential out-of-pocket max. They would essentially not, someone could essentially pay tons of money for care forever without the insurance company having to take over the care costs the way they do currently. But with out of network, that's kind of off the table. So the way this would work, if we go to page 2 of the summary of benefits, is we can see that there's a copay for primary care visits. It's $40, but that's for in-network participating providers. Specialists would cost $80 to see that same in-network provider. But if we look to the far right column, we see this 50% coinsurance. So what that means is if someone wants a POS because they want to go out of network, they will have to pay full price to see out of network providers until they have spent 15 grand. Then they're going to pay 50% of whatever the visit would normally cost. It's not going to be contracted because this is an out of network person forever. Because, well, until the end of the year, because there's no limit on the out of network, out of pocket max. So if someone is looking at this POS plan or a similar next year POS plan predicated on the fact that they want to go out of network, make sure they understand the financial element of this because it is significant. And I have to say, most clients that we see can't afford this. This would not be reasonable for them. All right. This is not reasonable for anyone. This is an overview of the former entity I worked for, Foundation Communities, and this is our very scary network overview. It is helpful, but it's a lot. I recommend if you work in a smaller area, bigger area, wherever you work, note these things. As soon as you learn that a certain company and that plan that they offer is in network with one hospital and not in network with another, get that information down because you're going to be looking it up constantly. So the sooner you compile something, and it does not have to look like this by any measure. This was specific to primary care. And again, a huge number of providers in Austin, Texas, and some of them offering, of course, more than one type of plan. As soon as you have that information, try and capture it. It is so useful to you. It can be useful to the other assisters at your entity. I was the person at my entity who put this together as soon as plans are released. So this is something you can work on as a team. And if you're in a smaller network, here's one I made for Illinois, an area Springfield, which is much smaller than some of the areas we're looking at. Make it small. It doesn't have to be pretty. It as long as it has information that helps you explain what's different about plans to your clients, it's accurate and up to date. This can be so helpful. This is why customers come back to assisters again and again because we have this inside knowledge of a local area. Okay, as promised, this is that resource page. At the very last thing is the webinar. Above it are a couple of blank templates, just in case you want to give building a network overview a shot. And then there are some enrollment tools, just different checklists and guides available for all y'all to use however works best. Feedback on these is always helpful. I work for Beyond the Basics as a contractor, so I do certain pieces of assisting when it comes to building resources. So if there's anything y'all need for future years that would be helpful, we always want to know that. Thank you guys so much for all you do. This is the hardest work, and you guys are in, if not the hardest state, one of the hardest states in which to do it, and it makes such a difference. Keep sharing those amazing stories of what you do, because now more than ever, we want to make sure that assisters are doing the work that they're doing, that we're funded to do this work, and that we keep it going. Best of luck to all y'all this season.
Thank you so much for that, Ariana. If I could tell everybody to give you a round of applause, I would. We could do that. We could raise our hands. I am not seeing any questions in the chat. Let me see here.
We've got a couple of raised hands.
Oh, okay.
I will see if I can unmute folks. I'm 99% sure I can. So Alma, I'm coming your way. Hang on a second.
And while Lynn's doing that, Ariana, can you drop your email in the chat? I know that we have it on the slides,
Absolutely.
but just,
2 minutes.
Okay, so let's see. It looks like Alma maybe lowered your hand, but Abel Trevino has your hand up. So I'm gonna click allow to talk and see if that works. Abel, are you able to unmute? No, there you go. And it looks like you're not muted anymore, but I can't hear you. And now you're muted again. Okay, Ariana did share her email in the chat for anybody who wants it. And Ari, I wonder if there's those cost sharing categories between that, jump between level 06, 05, and 04. There's that really helpful moment when navigators are helping, or when assisters are helping community members assess their income because it's an estimate for the coming year. But there's that tricky situation when if somebody estimates like $1 over, then they get bumped into a different cost sharing category and can have like a $1,300 deductible instead of a $0 deductible.
Literally.
I wonder if you could just speak to that.
Yeah, let me bring up that slide, and I go into that so like painfully lengthily on the on that walkthrough.
Oh, really? Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, but no problem. I do want to, I think it's an important thing to hit, because I would really recommend that we always think about this application as forward looking, which makes it remarkably different from the CHIP Medicaid application, right? The state-based entitlement applications have to look backwards. The marketplace application, because it's premised on taxes, has to look forward. And that is very complicated, especially for someone who's self-employed. And let's face it, the self-employed are who really benefited from the ACA, because they, of course, wouldn't have access to coverage. Heaven forbid if they had a pre-existing condition. My God, sorry, I can't get off my soapbox apparently. Okay, so I am sharing, right? Okay, so there it is.
Yes, you are sharing.
Yes, okay. But am I sharing what I'm supposed to be sharing? No, I'm not. Okay. Yay, technology. Okay, hopefully y'all can see this. So yeah, one of the most upsetting things I can recall seeing as a manager, because we would do kind of a check off. A client would enroll, the assister would sort of fill out some paperwork, and the manager would look it over. Usually we make sure the client's still there, but I think the client had to leave in a hurry. The client had estimated their income such that, let's say they're a household of one, they had estimated it at, instead of 22,590, they'd estimate it 22,593. So you can see that instead of having a $0 deductible, they had a $500. Instead of having a 2,000, they had a 3,000. This is not, obviously this is not the end of the world. Ultimately, this person is still so protected financially. I always say that worst case scenario, even if someone's in a full price, zero financial assistance, having insurance really can save you. And I'm someone whose kidney blew up when she was young and saw that it cost me almost $500,000 except for my crappy bronze plan. However, I will say that that's a bummer. Someone who really should have probably been eligible for a $0 deductible, a $2,000 out of pocket max, and a $0 copay for primary visits is instead at $503,020. I will say that I personally have avoided going to doctors because it cost me $80 versus $40. And I know that's a really bad thing to admit, especially in this venue, but we need to be real about the fact that financial commitment to this stuff is a barrier. And this makes a difference. 2,000 versus 3,000 makes a big difference. More than that, imagine someone estimating at, let's say, 30,125 as a household of one. So here now we're looking at the difference between that pink box and the green box. And it just breaks my heart. Like, that's terribly different. Now, never should we ever be like, oh, you need to estimate at this amount to get all the, we can't do that. But if we're working with someone and it's an estimate, we're okay to let them know there is a big jump in terms of your eligibility between these two places. Are you 100% certain you're going to earn 30,000 to 125 versus 30,000? Because that's a rounding error, right? You add up to what the difference is between that per month versus the other amount, and then you compare $6,400 as a max versus 3 grand. And things like a specialty visit, $40 versus $80. Like, as much as we can, let's make sure people understand that this looks forward and it's an estimate, right? This is what we do. We're not telling them how to estimate. We need to ensure that they're engaged with the estimate process, but also understanding the repercussions of an estimate. We don't have to hide eligibility charts from anybody. That's what they're there for. The client can look it up and do whatever they want to do on their own, right? It's us who are here to ensure that it's being understood properly. And I would say more often than not, I see clients mess up their applications in a way that disadvantages them, as opposed to somehow doing, scoring all kinds of free stuff. I don't see that barely at all. And I've done this a long time.
You said scoring all
Sorry.
kinds of free stuff.
Oh, God.
We have Irma Linda also has a hand up. Irma Linda, I'm gonna click on allow you to talk and let's see if you can unmute yourself. Okay.
Can people put it in the chat with that?
Yeah, most of the stuff in the chat right now is just a lot of gratitude to you. Major thanks for your excellent presentation. I don't
know,
see
y'all
any
are.
questions. Yeah. Oh, cool. Irma Linda was
Thank you.
applauding for the visual, so you're still getting like a bunch of applause.
That's the other thing about you people in Texas. You guys are so kind to me. These no, I'm not going to talk crap about Vermont, but my dog got sprayed by a skunk, and everywhere I go now, people are like, "You smell like skunk." I think Texans wouldn't say that.
This is true. Texans would give you their boots and their hat. Susan just put into the chat that you are a true ACA solutionaire, and I fully support that comment. So for those of you who asked whether or not Ari's slides would be available, they totally will. We'll get them onto the Every Texan website, like I mentioned. And I think we're at that part now, unless anybody has any last minute things where we'll go ahead and we'll spin the raffle for a couple of gift cards for folks who made it here to the end. And thank you for those who did. And we will launch a poll. Oh, Gigi says she misses seeing you.
Oh, Gigi.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, let me go ahead and do that. Everybody keep sending your love to Ariana. Thank you so much for doing this. What an amazing presentation. I did pop a link in the chat for the 2025 Texas Sisters FPL chart. It's also linked on conference details on that page for today. So yeah, and if anybody has tools or tips or like the things that y'all use that are good for your sister community and you feel like others across Texas would be able to use those as well, get them to me and we can share them out also. And Ari, if you would stop sharing your screen so I can share mine, and Sonia.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I clarify that when we talk about 2025, we're really talking about the 2024 federal poverty level guidelines, but it's for calendar year 2025 coverage.
Yeah.
So it's just a little something that
it's so weird. It's
Yeah.
as though we rely on the calculation that happened the
Correct.
year before. So
Correct.
that can be very tricky.
Yeah, and so it gets tricky when they don't get released until the spring of the following year. So like 2025 federal poverty level guidance won't come out until March, but we won't use them until November of
Right.
next year. For
I mean,
calendar year
for our
26.
purposes, yeah, for our purposes, I guess we do okay. It's definitely annoying though for other
Yeah,
other
it
eligible
is.
uses.
It is. Okay, well, Lynn, if you.
And Jennifer just asked a question in the chat, 2025, we will use in November, correct?
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
so
right.
you'll use the 2025 coverage year FPL chart that I just popped in the chat, which has 2024 FPL numbers actually in it.
Yeah,
No, it doesn't. Wait, it does?
yeah,
Oh, I see.
because
Mhm.
Sorry.
because
Sorry.
2025 is not out. 2025 is not out yet. That's why I just don't want, I usually train my health centers to really understand that there's a 2024, but we're gonna use it, but we don't use it until November when open enrollment starts. But CHIP and Medicaid started using it when they released them
Exactly.
earlier
Yeah.
this year in March. So I just, want to make sure that we don't confuse people, because I will get people ask me, Sonia, where are the 2025 FPLs? And I'm like, it's actually the 2024, but we use that for the calendar year 2025 coverage. So Lynn,
Awesome.
if I could go and ask you to I guess launch the poll.
I will launch the poll.
And
Launch.
um,
Okay, cool. Poll
and
is
we'll have,
up.
and then maybe we could do our raffle. I want to make
I
sure.
will spin the wheel.
Remember,
Hey,
you
why
have to
don't
be
we do
present
it?
to be, must be present to win.
Let's see here.
Last couple of sessions, we've had some luck. It was pretty quick.
Participants. Now that I don't have my headphones in, you can. Oh, Laura Chikaisa. Okay, cool. Well, it looks like it came around back for you, Laura. Or Laura. That's fantastic. Let me also do one more time. Okay. And Rosa Varela. Let's see if Rosa is here. I am gonna check our participants. Oh, Rosa's not here. That's okay. We'll go one more time until we get to a second person. Okay, Heidi Granado, let's see. Nope, not here either. That's okay. We'll keep going. And then for anybody who might be done with your workday after Ariana's presentation, we will, at least me on this call right now, will, Huda Al-Madani. Nope. Keep spinning. It's like the end of the day, you know? Yeah, anyway, we'll be at the Meals on Wheels campus in San Antonio, the campus of Grace, for a couple of hours with free food and free drinks. Mackenzie Martin. Nope. Make sure I'm doing this right. We've got Martinez's, we've got Noemi's. Okay, cool. We'll get there, y'all. We'll get there eventually. Griselda Flores. All right. Second winner. Oh, Gary. Hi. Ariana's dog is Gary, everybody, in case you didn't know that. Okay, well, Laura and Griselda, congratulations. We'll make sure that we'll email over to you some $50 gift cards. Thank you, Ari. Thank you, Gary, for this lovely show of puppy love. And we'll see everybody tomorrow at 9 a.m. for immigration eligibility, eligibility, enrollment, utilization for immigrants and immigrant families, mixed immigration status families, and then also second and closing panel for Texas State of Enrollment, our Assister Roundtable, featuring a lot of the folks who are in our chat here today, longtime seasoned assisters, advocates, community health workers, just doing the work and making it possible for folks to have improved health outcomes in Texas. So thank you all for such a wonderful day. Thank you, panelists, presenters, St. David's Foundation, Sonia, Texas Association of Community Health Centers, Aaron O'Malley, Naomi Cruz Ojeda from Every Texan, Jada Sanford, and Travis from Young Invincibles. It's been a real pleasure today. And tomorrow will be awesome as well. So have a good night. If anybody's in San Antonio, see you at the Meals on Wheels office around 4:30. And congratulations, y'all. That's a wrap for day one.
Thank you all.
Thanks, y'all. See you soon.